Hi, everybody. Welcome back, and thanks for tuning in once again to Red Ice Radio. I'm Henrik Palmgren from Sweden, and today we're talking with William Lyne about occult ether physics and Tesla's hidden space propulsion system and the conspiracy to conceal it. According to the bio on his website, he had a top-secret clearance in Air Force intelligence, earned a Bachelor's of Science degree in Art and Industrial Technology from Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas. He acquired a Master's of Fine Arts from the University of Texas at Austin, and in 1975 he says he rejected a high-paying and prestigious executive CIA position offered by then-Director George Bush because he believes the National Security Act of 1947 is an illegal betrayal of American sovereignty and liberty, and that the flying saucer, as man's greatest invention, should be enjoyed by all. William Lyne, welcome to Red Ice Radio. Thank you for coming on. It's a pleasure to speak to you. How's everything in your neck of the woods, William?
It's quiet, and the weather's nice for a change.
That's great. That's really nice. Now, tell us a little bit about your background in this field and some of the topics we're going to get into here today. It's you've written extensively on this. Of course, you have 4 books now, I believe, out on this. Maybe it's more Occult Ether Physics, Space Aliens from the Pentagon, and also Pentagon Aliens. And now the latest one here they're going to talk about more is Occult Science Dictatorship. So what's your path like, William?
Early in life, I was inclined towards art and aircraft. That's when I was 3 years old. And as a child, I was basically a mechanical genius. I'm not bragging, it's just one of those things. I could take apart a watch and put it all back together and make it work if it was broken, that type of thing, when I was 3 years old. But when I was 7 years old, or 8 years old, I began to hear about the flying discs. So everything that I'd already learned about airplanes, which involved aerodynamics and so forth, was thrown out the window when I heard about these things. Not completely at first until I witnessed one of these ships when I was 15. But when I was 8, I began to interview oil field pumpers who witnessed these things in southern New Mexico, and they'd been seen in West Texas, and which I assumed were German aircraft that were brought over here after the war. And I heard from a friend of mine who'd grown up where Tesla did his experiments in Colorado Springs, and he was a Tesla aficionado, so to speak. It was a radio man, and he told me that those were flying machines invented by Nikola Tesla, and that was in 1946. In 1947, of course, you had the Roswell incident, and so that excited my interest, and I began to watch the skies a lot more. I saw whole squadrons of UFOs flying from New Mexico into West Texas at night, whole squadrons of them at high altitude. And then they would turn in increments of 30 degrees, 90, 60, 180. They could reverse course at high speed. So I thought, well, these are really interesting, you know. And so I was also an artist from the time I was a small child, and eventually I studied. In 1953, I saw, and we had an incredible sighting when we were having a party in our backyard, and one of these ships appeared, and I basically clocked it at 36,000 miles per hour when it left in 3 seconds. It took 3 seconds to reach a point of infinity. It did 2 90-degree turns and then went to infinity in 3 seconds. And in West Texas, that would be 36,000 miles an hour. I calculated that on 30 miles to the point of infinity, plus my eyesight was at least 20/20. So, and I counted off the seconds as it departed to clock it, because I'd learned to do that. I'd been clocking aircraft quite a while, and I was interested in aircraft performance and speed and that sort of thing. And I had been building model UFOs, flying saucers with propellers on them, and one with a jet engine. And when I saw that, I realized that the propellers and jet engines had nothing to do with it. It had nothing to do with aerodynamics, because there was no sonic boom and there was no shock wave or any of that stuff. It didn't make any noise. There was no swishing around or anything. It was just silent, and the electrostatic discharges were profuse. So I decided at that point that it was an electrical flying machine.
How did you detect or measure the electromagnetic discharge?
Just by sight, you could see the corona was pretty incredible around it. It left a trail of corona behind it that sparkled and then scintillated and then eventually faded out.
Right.
And that meant there were electrostatic charges in the air. And also, as the thing was, when we first spotted it, it was precessing at about 45 degrees as it hovered, which was only about 300 feet away. And it was at about 45 degrees at about 300 feet from our position. And so as it precessed on the bottom, it had a red glow, pinkish glow. That usually means microwaves, but the rest of it was electrostatic. So it had the pinkish glow indicated some sort of electromagnetic field,
right,
to make it glow that color, infrared. And the electrostatic discharges were profuse, so you couldn't miss them. And it created a rainbow effect, what they call metallic color. You see red. That's the reason people are so confused about the color. They see red, blue, green, pink, violet. All of the colors appear in this corona. And so anyway, I went on. Go on forward. My background. I went ahead and I was in the Air Force. I was in Air Force intelligence for a short time, and I was put in there because I had uncovered what basically had happened. I uncovered a Soviet spy ring, which is running the Air Force Career Counseling Center at Lackland Air Force Base, and they were sabotaging personnel records, putting people in, juggling their aptitude scores and putting them in the wrong fields. And I uncovered that, and then so what happened was the Air Force apparently didn't appreciate that. Eisenhower didn't like it. They poisoned me. They tried to murder me, and I didn't die, but I was left with narcolepsy. So I was still represented something that had to be taken care of by damage control. So they stuck me in Air Force intelligence to try to shut me up and keep me from talking about this.
Why was that? Why was that? Do you think? You think they would be happy?
I think Eisenhower thought he'd lose the election if the public found out. It was right before the election in 1956, and he was afraid he'd lose the election if the public found out. That's my only thing I can come up with.
Huh.
That they would do something like that, to somebody for uncovering something that important, because it was something that would have been on the headlines, if news media had gotten hold of it.
Let me ask you though, did they? Although it was remained quiet, it seems like in the press and such, did they still kind of dissolve this spy ring unofficially, or what happened?
I was told the Air Force intelligence people weren't involved in persecuting me. They were trying to help me. So that means they knew I was getting screwed, so to speak.
Right.
And were trying to help me because they thought that I was kind of like to them, I was kind of like a hero who was getting really getting screwed. So they told me that this ring had been arrested, and that was the only reason I knew about that. My tip about this to the adjutant, because they'd screwed my test scores up and put me in the wrong field. So the only reason I knew about that ring was because Air Force intelligence contacted me and told me they'd been arrested and they would try to help me. But I made the mistake of telling my roommate that. My roommate was the little brother of the Navy officer who was in charge of putting me down. And so all that information went to him. So the Air Force intelligence guys were probably reprimanded, or who knows what happened to them, over that, because they weren't supposed to. It was confidential. So anyway, after I got out of I studied art. I began to study art at night when I was in the Air Force. I went to art school in Columbus, Ohio, for a year and a half, and then I went back to Texas and I studied art in college. And eventually, I went to undergraduate school at Sam Houston State University, and I majored in fine arts and minored in industrial arts. Actually, it was a double major, and so I learned quite a lot about technology in the industrial arts major. And then I went to the University of Texas and got a MFA in studio arts. And So then I came to New Mexico about 40, going on 44 years ago. So it's 44 years ago I came to New Mexico, and I've been here, and there's been quite a lot of activity of UFOs in New Mexico. We used to spot them, but they're harder to see now because I think they're clamping down on sightings. They don't want people to see them much now, so they're being very secretive right now.
Huh. Interesting.
Just since Obama's been in office, they've been very secretive.
All right. Well, we'll need to talk about that more later as well, William. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Please carry on there.
Sure. And so that brings us up to the present, and I've written these books since 1993. I also do some inventing, and I have an invention called the Lyne atomic hydrogen furnace, and it is scheduled to be built and tested. So that is something that I'm looking forward to because it's a very interesting technology. And it may be very upsetting to the oil industry, I think, in the end.
All right.
Unless they figure out some way to crush it, or whatever. But it has promise. There's been a number of copycats. I published a primitive set of plans in my book, in one of my books in 1997, and it's been copied by a number of people, and they've tested it. So there's a number of tests that show that it's very promising, just as I'd said in the original book, even without the testing. So I predicted it to be very, very good for producing energy from the environment.
Well, I definitely want to ask you more about that later on as well. But let's go back a little bit here and talk about some of the things then that you've written about and such, specifically related to both Tesla's work and also the UFO field in general. I mean, you have perhaps a unique, we could call it, view or approach or interpretation to this particular work. Tell us more about what you call electrodynamic space propulsion and how you went about, I guess, realizing or decoding, Tesla's work, basically.
Well, it was like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. I find a piece here and a piece there, and it took quite a while to put it all together. And then I realized it's not electromagnetic or electrodynamic space propulsion. It's actually electrostatic. It's electromechanical is a better way to describe it. It actually uses what Tesla called mechanical waves. And these are created with the Tesla coil. A Tesla coil is an electrostatic generator, and it produces DC, rapidly varying electrostatic voltages. And they vary very rapidly. It's the rapid variance of the voltage that creates these waves in the ether, which Tesla calls sound waves in the ether, which travel at the speed of light. And what that means is according to Tesla, is electromagnetic waves can't travel in free space. They can only travel through solid substances, and that's the reason for the difference between Einstein, Hertz, and all these other people, is they believed in a solid ether, and Tesla believed in a gaseous ether. And because only a solid ether could actually conduct electromagnetic waves. So these are actually what we call radio waves, are actually mechanical longitudinal pressure waves in the ether that travel at the speed of light. They're similar to sound waves, which travel in the atmosphere, and except they travel at the speed of light, and they use the ether, which is subatomic. So it's a different look at this thing. And Tesla said these mechanical waves propel his ship in a pulling action. So the waves are projected in front of the ship, and it pulls the ship forward, and it's a very powerful effect, of course. And it probably reacts on the atmosphere too to cancel shock waves and sound waves. I mean, normal sound waves and sonic booms.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, what causes a boom is the air coming back together after it parts. Same way as when a lightning bolt strikes, that boom you hear from a thunderbolt is not from the air coming apart; it's from the air clapping back together.
Right.
So this wave of, as I described it, a trail of electrostatics behind the ship apparently keeps the air from clapping back together quickly. so it prevents the sonic boom. And so it's quite interesting that all these things work together to produce such a fantastic airship. And most people think the reason people think this is alien technology is because we've been kept so far behind about the real developments in science by the government that it looks like alien technology to us, because we're I don't know, 35, 40, 50 years behind the government.
Right.
So they have this fantastic technology, and it's all classified, and we're denied the use of this stuff in violation of our Constitution, which set up the patent system to transfer technology from inventors to the public. So they're not transferring that technology. It's supposed to be given to us after 17 years. The inventor has 17 years of exclusive use and development of his own invention, and then we get it. So we're being denied the use of fantastic technology because the oil companies and other corporations control the government, and they don't want us to have this stuff because it will ruin all their investments.
It's a lot of the power hierarchy very much kind of resides on this particular struggle, if you will. But you're right in the beginning of Occult Science Dictatorship, that the motive is basically began behind this idea that the establishment media, they've been promoting relativism. It was to suppress and ridicule and conceal basically what you mentioned is the ether physics and other kind of free energy discoveries, and that this happens in conjunction with the media giants and the energy companies, as you mentioned. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yes. Well, you see, you take, for instance, the oil industry. I grew up, for 12 years, I was in West Texas as a boy. And then I worked for an oil company eventually for a couple of years after I was in the Air Force. And the oil companies, basically, they have all their investments in these mineral rights and so forth. And if somebody came along with a new energy discovery, well, all that investment could be worthless very quickly. And so the banks are backed up in it too. They're all invested in this same type of stuff. Archaic technology is what I call it. They're invested. We're using archaic technology. The most fantastic thing we have is archaic. A jet plane is a piece of junk compared to a UFO. And same way, UFOs can replace trains, trucks, you name it. As Tesla said, weight is no object. So that means that a large UFO could pick up a herd of cattle and take them to a market in a matter of minutes. There's no problem with picking up those kinds of weights. I've seen UFOs that are pretty large. I saw one in Hyde Park that was about 50 feet thick, about 450 feet long, and about 250 feet wide, shaped like a big lozenge, rounded all around. But it looked like had the profile of a football field, that size. And on the bottom it was dark green. And it was putting off the Tesla corona ahead of itself. So the corona, the discharges from the electrostatics were moving towards the front and reaching out in advance of the ship. So that's consistent with what Tesla said, the sound waves in the ether going in that direction and pulling the ship forward. So, I saw one of those in the mountains above Santa Fe, a place called Hyde Park. I was in a hot tub with a group of people, and we spotted that ship, and it did a big circle in a few seconds and came back and stopped on the dime. And then my son and I saw a large ship, bigger than that, between Santa Fe and Los Alamos one evening, just at sundown, and this ship was probably 600 feet across and was shaped like a big saucer shape. Although it wasn't rounded, it was more like angular saucer on the bottom and top, and then it had a row of lights around the middle that were sequencing counterclockwise. They were sequencing and red, so this red light thing, and they were like different banks of lights around it were lighting up and turning on and off as it went around. So I think that might be some sort of stabilization technology using infrared, because as Tesla said, and the ether physicist said, that the ether is a solid. Let's see, what did they say? It's a solid to light and heat. So it would solidify the ether. This infrared light would solidify the ether and stop the precession motion, because the precession, when you think about it, is probably some kind of an ether reaction. You know, when a body precesses because it's spinning, or something spinning inside of it to make it precess.
Right.
So the actual UFOs that I've seen haven't been spinning. I've never seen one actually spinning, but they can create the effect of spinning by precessing. It causes the light to play around on the bottom, kind of like a aluminum pan, you know, that's been spun. You know what I'm talking about, metal spinning. It's a technique.
Yeah.
It has these little lines all in it, and when you wave it around, the light plays around on it. It kind of looks like it's spinning. So it's kind of an optical illusion, I think. But you think about it, a UFO couldn't really be spinning, because it would create so much gyroscopic stability that the ship wouldn't be able to turn. It wouldn't be able to go up or down. You know, it wouldn't be able to turn down or up because of the momentum. It's like a bicycle wheel. You know, once it's spinning, you can't just turn it, you know, very rapidly. You know what I mean? It resists being turned. So it's like any spinning object. So you don't want that. But inside the ship, there is spinning machinery to generate the electrical current that is used to power the ship. And Tesla wove this in with the stabilization system. So the turbine, along with the machinery, was used to create stability on one axis, and they probably had another axis of stabilization to create gyro stabilization of the ship to keep it, you know, steady in the sky, because, as he said, it could remain absolutely stationary. So basically they can use, you know, high definition of, you know, telescopic camera equipment to spy on people, this type of thing. You know, that's what I believe they're using it for, is surveillance. And they had trouble developing weaponry for the UFO originally than the Germans had it, because you couldn't put normal ammunition aboard a UFO, because the detonators and bullets was made out of fulminate of mercury, and if you put electrostatics around fulminate, it's going to explode. So if they put ammunition on there, the ammo would start exploding from the power system. So they didn't have any bullets to put on the ships originally, so they just used them to draw the fire of our bombers over Germany during World War II. I saw the film was made by my intelligence division during World War II, so we had the original film in our library, and it was shown to us one day, which I was kind of astounded, because that's highly classified. We actually saw the footage of the Foo Fighters attacking the B-17 bombers over Germany at night, and you could see the ship flying around and the electrical discharge, and it was not small like the misinformationists would have you believe. They were about the size, the ships that I saw were about the size of a Volkswagen. And I speculated that maybe, what's his name? What's the designer of the Volkswagen, the German designer?
Yeah, good question, actually. I should know that.
Ferdinand Porsche. They have designed the original German UFOs, you know. He was well known.
Is that where you think it's come out of? I mean, you're determined, I guess, then pretty much at this point, that what we see with the UFO phenomena, this is a completely man-made, you know, thing. It's a technology from us. It's not alien. It's not reversed engineered from some crash or something like that. So obviously, I want to ask you more both how you came to that conclusion, but also then in the extension. How was this developed? I mean, is it's something that's built on Tesla technology, but other people have picked it up consequently and expanded on it?
Well, Tesla offered it to the U.S. government in 1914. They turned him down, so he sold it all to Germany, along with a lot of other technology, including submarine technology, torpedo technology, stuff like that. And he offered it to the government, the U.S. government first, and they turned him down. So he sold it. And then,
do you know why?
Well, he had to have money. He needed money, and
No. I mean, why the U.S. government turned it down?
Who knows? Maybe they had somebody else that in the corporate world who they had a cozier deal with, and they thought, well, we don't want to spoil this arrangement with our friends here. So
okay.
That's the only thing I can come up with. And so Tesla sold them that, and then that was before the war, so nobody really knew there was going to be a war, I suppose. And so then in the 1930s, the Germans were interested in this technology, and so they had a secret project at Los Alamos, New Mexico, when that was just Spanish land grant property there. And it was funded by the Florence and it's a Guggenheim Foundation. It was funded by the Guggenheim Foundation, and it was funded by the National Geographic Foundation, and it was funded by the Smithsonian Institution. And there's been nothing published about it. I'm the only one that's published anything on it. They funded this project at Los Alamos, and the Germans, you see what's his name? Von Braun showed up with 16 top German scientists, and they worked on that project for 2 years. So Von Braun was actually in New Mexico for about 2 years before World War II.
Okay.
And he's from 36 to just before Christmas 1938 when he went back to Germany, married his high school sweetheart. But, there are people who tried to dispute this on me. Well, they're just ignorant people. The scientists at Los Alamos know about this. I've talked to a number of them. They're familiar with it. I first heard about it from my friend Peter Van Dresser, who was the inventor of that rocket engine that von Braun acquired in that project, took back to Germany and put on the V2.
Mm-hmm.
And Van Dresser and his four partners in the American Rocket Society up in New York actually developed that engine. And so von Braun was able to pick up the final, product of the UFO project along with that rocket engine and by coming to Los Alamos. And of course that was before the war.
Tell us a bit more about that, the foundations, the Guggenheim, Smithsonian, they're in Los Alamos with a German faction. Now, is this beyond, national stuff? Did the U.S. military know about that at the time, or is this more of a private, thing, if you know what I mean?
Very strange. I seem to be the only one that's published anything on it, although I was able to, I know from my friend Peter and from his papers that are in the archives, the New Mexico archives, and things that he told me, the first scientist from Germany that was invited by the American Rocket Society to participate in this research was William Lyne. So he came over around 1934, but he defected. And he said all he wanted to do was get away from Hitler. The Nazis had taken over the project at Peenemünde, and actually it was at Komersdorf first, and then they moved it to Peenemünde and made it a military project. And so Lay was able to get away from the Nazis, but the U.S. government didn't employ him in any capacity until the end of the war, even though he was the real genius in German rocketry at the time. But you see, the engine that Peter and his associates had developed was the only one that worked for sustained flight. The rest of them all blew up because the combustion chamber overheated. And what they did is they wrapped the fuel line around the combustion chamber to cool it and also vaporized the fuel and made the engine a lot more efficient. So it made it practical for outer space, and that's what they were interested in. They were just interested in exploring space. That was their main idea. Willy Ley and his these other guys. And
And the American Rocket Society, they weren't tied to the government directly, correct? Or were they funded by them?
No, they were a private group that Peter and his friends were the founders of the American Rocket Society, but then it expanded and included Dr. Robert Goddard in Massachusetts, who had laboratories in New Mexico, and he was part of that project at Los Alamos too. And they invited von Braun when Willy Ley had defected. So they just found a replacement for Ley, and that was von Braun. And von Braun was rapidly accelerated in rank just before he came, because I guess they wanted to make sure that he didn't defect too. And so, then they worked on this project, and then they folded it all up. Apparently, at the end of the project, Tesla wrote up a paper on the project and sent it to Washington, and the U.S. government shut the project down. So I thought, well, this is just really amazing, that the government just ignored all this stuff. They didn't develop, the U.S. government didn't develop any significant liquid fuel rocketry during World War II. It was all solid fuel rockets. And meanwhile, the German projects had gotten quite advanced. And they had developed the UFO by that time to a higher form. Now, the project in Los Alamos during the 30s was called P2, small t, large 2, small p, large 2, P2, which has something to do with electromagnetic dipole or something like that, basically a Tesla coil. So, the symbol for the project was a triangle with a dot in the middle, which brings to mind some Masonic idea, the all-seeing eye, that sort of thing. And
so is this anything that's been documented, as you said, in the archives or whatnot, or is this more from witness and testimony from people who worked on it?
Well, I did research what I could find on von Braun's biography, along with Willy Lyne's.
Right.
And I could see the missing 2 years, from Germany. I could see the way Lay had come over, and then he married a Russian ballerina named Olga Feldman. So I guess that put him on the outs with the Third Reich right there. But he stayed on, and the government eventually employed him at College Park, Maryland, in a secret project of some sort. Probably the first American UFO project after the war, or they were getting ready for it. I think they already knew they were going to get this project from Germany before the war was over, and they were already getting ready for it.
Well, it seems to me, if you piece this together in hindsight, then if this is how things indeed unfolded, it seems like this is really just the inception point of what was concluded with Operation Paperclip, that they began, with the work over in the U.S. first, split up, and then basically, carried on one branch of this in Germany. And then after the war, U.S. ships over, the Nazi scientists again and kind of picks it up from that point. Is that how things unfolded then, in your view?
Yeah, pretty much. Actually, there was a project before Paperclip called Project Alsos. It was run by an American Russian extraction named Boris Pash. And they picked up 100 and something Nazi scientists who were scheduled to be executed by General Franz Kammler. And Kammler was apparently working with the Allies already. And he delivered those scientists to Portugal, where they were handed over to the American authorities, and then he certified back to the Third Reich that they were executed. So we got those scientists, and then they were from Peenemünde. And I believe that's where they were from. And then of course, von Braun took his group to link up with American intelligence too. He took his group out of Peenemünde, and it was eventually picked up very early. And von Braun was in charge of American rocket research at Fort Bliss, Texas, for the U.S. Army in June 1945 or something like that, very early. It didn't take him any time at all before he was already in charge of the rocket research. And Fort Bliss bleeds over into White Sands Missile Range. It's outside El Paso, but it also includes part of New Mexico, and then, that's contiguous border with White Sands Missile Range, which is where they did a lot of the UFO research and rocket research. And so that whole area was just, one of the air bases there in New Mexico. Let's see, what is it? It's Holloman Air Force Base at Alamogordo was where they did early UFO flights, and those flights were coming out over West Texas quite a bit, and that was north of where we lived, just across the Texas border. So there was information leaking out, even though they don't think there were any leaks, there were, and so I was keeping a close eye on this stuff. Here was I, the boy, experimenter. I was, had experimented with Tesla coils and that sort of thing, and was really working on this UFO project. And it took me quite a while to finally put it all together. And my books have a lot of errors in them up until just about 3 years ago, when I finally began to really piece it together. There was some, I was playing around with different things, electromagnetic propulsion, hydrodynamic, the different kinds of propulsion systems, and I finally realized when I reread these Tesla papers that he said it was mechanical waves, and sound waves in the ether. So that tied it down.
So you're saying you managed to replicate some of the discoveries of what consequently has been put in the UFOs that we see. Is that correct?
I wasn't able to get liftoff on anything that I built, but some of the people that experimented with it did.
Any names there you want to mention from people?
I can't. There's a man who bought my second edition of Space Aliens from the Pentagon, and he read it on the airliner on his way across the country, and then he and his father did the experiments and got liftoff.
Okay.
And his father was also an engineer, so they were able to get liftoff. And I wasn't able to view it because I didn't have the money to travel to visit with them.
So at this point, William, has this been theoretical hypothesis from your point of view up to this point, or have you ever witnessed one of these machines or how they actually operate up close?
I haven't, witnessed one that, most of the people that have had, there's another person that got success, but he's driven crazy by the government, and he lives in Santa Fe. And he wouldn't tell me that he'd gotten liftoff. His father told me. And but the other guy just doesn't want to be identified, and I don't guess I blame him. So I haven't witnessed it. I only have the word of this guy who invited me to come view the results.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't afford it, so I didn't go.
Well, that's a bummer.
Was all the way up in New York, which is a long way from here, and so it's pretty interesting. So I got the information that the guy apparently, even with the old plans, which I put in second edition of Space Aliens from the Pentagon, he was able to get that result because it's just a matter of tuning. It's if you have things oriented the right direction, then you can get the results. And it's basically Tesla technology.
Right. So I want to ask you more about that later, the makeup and what we're actually seeing and how it potentially could be replicated and all that interesting stuff. But before we do that, how do you think that this is unfolded in terms of what they actually do with the technology? And just to be clear on another point here as well, is this something that still is tied to, let's say, national security from the point of view of, all right, this is the U.S. government, it's the military, sub-branch of that actually has, developed the program, it's they who are running it, or is it, I think this is an important question to kind of try to pin down a little bit more, is it a private, co-joint entity of various people from different nationalities, and it's not really government or military run?
I believe there is a world government that's been in existence since I was 19 years old. I mean, it's been in existence longer than that, but that's when I became aware of it, that it had to be a world government, because this stuff is not really handled much by the military. Very few, if anybody in the military, really is privy to this information. They keep it at a very high level, although they do constructions of these ships are being constructed on military bases because they have the security of the military. They couldn't locate this in some city where they'd have to worry about leaks and spies and all this kind of stuff. So they put it on military bases. And their normal aircraft corporations are involved in building these things, like Raytheon and Teledyne are involved in making components. And other corporations, are involved in making these ships, and they have a lot of them. And so, basically, it's helped at a very high level, and there are international agreements that we know about some of them, but we don't have any idea about some of these agreements because they're secret executive edicts. There was something like, during Eisenhower's time, there was something like 700 edicts, secret ones.
On an international scale level?
Yeah, and that's basically how they're controlling our, people are alarmed about the way the government keeps taking away our civil rights, and they can make according to the way the filthy U.S. Supreme Court interprets the Constitution now, the government can execute a treaty that takes away all of our rights, and it becomes the law of the land.
Right.
Although that's not my interpretation of the Constitution. The Constitution says all laws passed pursuant to the Constitution, which means that the Constitution overrides anything that tries to supersede it.
Right, yeah.
However, that's these secret edicts, and they basically, for example, at the end of World War II, under the Yalta Agreement, they gave Russia a monopoly on platinum metals. And there wasn't any competition. In this country, they didn't recognize any platinum production in the whole United States. And so if anybody tried to produce platinum here, the Russians had the right to come in and steal the platinum or stop the production. And they actually did this. And they, for instance, a 2,200-pound ingot of platinum disappeared on a train in South Africa. It was removed from the train and probably buried, along the way, just to prevent platinum competition with the Russian government, which had a monopoly on platinum group metals. But there was some production in Canada and other places, but they basically, the biggest platinum production was in nickel, the place in Russia called nickel, which is just totally talking about, apparently it's very heavily contaminated, with chemical wastes, very deadly stuff, and so forth.
Tell us a bit more than what this has led to and where you think they are at this stage. I mean, what are they doing with the technology? Where are they going? Are we talking about space programs that have been running now, unofficial ones for a long time? And if so, any speculation as to what's going on?
Well, my idea is, I'm not certain that they're going in outer space with them, but they could be, and they probably are, because according to the theory, they could travel in outer space. And since the ether is all pervading and everywhere, they could be traveling in outer space, and they could travel at pretty much any speed they wanted to, so they wouldn't have to use the high-speed travel of a rocket to, that would be pelted with, asteroids and so forth, to go like to the moon or somewhere like that. But I believe and there's it's factually true, there have been international agreements, for instance, with Russia since long before the end of Russia and the end of the Soviet state. There were international, agreements. And so there was cooperation because they all agreed, all the major countries agreed to keep the UFO sightings secret. In 1955, they had a meeting in Switzerland, and they agreed to keep it secret. So they're not hiding it from each other; they're hiding it from us. And all the major powers have UFO technology.
Right. Yeah.
Possessed by the United States, Canada, Sweden, Norway, Germany, probably France, probably China, and England. And so, that technology is, if I could figure out basically how it works, then so could any other scientist anywhere, that had the freedom to do so. or the encouragement by their governments to do so. And the Iranians claim they've got it now, which could be why there's suddenly a turnaround in their attitude towards Iran.
Right. Yeah, I've heard about that too. It was actually, I think it was when we had Kesh on the program who has claimed credit for the production of those that Iran has. That it was actually at that point that the other ones, well, basically he said that the other ones don't have it, and Iran was the only one. But there you go. It's just going to be discrepancies like that in between people. But do you think then that this has anything to do with what allegedly was found out by quote unquote hacker, Gary McKinnon, who looked into the NASA stuff, where he talked about, the Space Command, I believe it was, there was basically off world, people who were involved in a program. Is that on that level? Yeah.
Oh, I believe that's misinformation about aliens. There's no aliens coming to.
No. This was about human, like a space command. It was a military program run, I guess, by NASA, who had
I wouldn't be
officers in space and had a program running, basically.
My son has a cute little video that he made about 6 years ago called Electromagnetic Flight and You, in which it's a fake Army training film for UFO pilots after World War II. And he called it the Gravity Core.
Mm-hmm.
But they inevitably were training American pilots out of Holloman Air Force Base. And that's what we were seeing. We were seeing UFOs that were being piloted by German and American pilots, because they brought 15,000 Germans to New Mexico after World War II. And there's no record published anywhere of that, but I got that information from a neighbor who was she was a German security agent from the time she was 15 years old, assigned to White Sands Missile Range. And she was Bavarian and owned a castle over in Austria-Hungary somewhere that the German government bought from her even before the fall of the Soviet state. They figured they'd use it for a tourist attraction when things came back to normal. And but anyway, she was a major in the Wehrmacht, and she told me she was part of a group of 15,000 Germans, and they were signed, to New Mexico. So that's quite amazing. There are only a few hundred scientists in that group, but many technicians and support personnel. And they brought that whole project over to New Mexico because they were afraid the Russians were going to overrun the whole country in Germany and grab all this stuff. So I don't know. There was all kinds of technology they were afraid that the Russians were going to get. The Russians got quite a lot of it, and but the United States already had the major bits of it, and there were 3 sets of files, and the United States acquired all 3 and of the technical files. And one of the things that was used by General Otto Skorzeny to negotiate for his amnesty was that he had stashed some of this technology, and he could turn it over to the Russians or turn it over to the Americans,
Mm-hmm.
So they had to make a deal with him. And then what they did is they sent him down to the U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps, sent him down to Argentina to set up Odessa. So Odessa was actually a creation of the U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps to protect the SS from being extradited and interrogated by the KGB. And they didn't want the Russians to interrogate them. They knew too much, and so these guys were all sent down there. And the gold that was taken down there by Bormann was used to sustain them until eventually they started investing in various things and to sustain this group. And so they've been involved in a lot of investments.
Well, let me just talk a little bit briefly here more about the books and where people can get those, and then we can take a short break and then carry on and talk more about this. I many more questions I want to ask you pertaining to the work in the books, and also tying this into a little bit, going back again to the scientific kind of dictatorship that's kind of laid on top of it, or the occult scientific dictatorship, as the book is called, but and the mind control aspect and everything else. So much more to get into that, William. But let's give out some of the details here. People, I guess the easiest way for people for now to get a hold of the books if they want to read more is on Amazon.com, correct?
Yes.
And give us the titles of the books that you have, so people can just search for that. We're going to have some of the links up as well on the website, but give us the titles.
Well, the ones that are in print are Occult Ether Physics, and there's a third edition, but the fourth edition is available, and I suggest people get that. Why get the third when you can get the fourth? Fourth has a little bit better information. It's the last edition, and then to me, it's the last edition I'm going to write of that book, because I don't expect, unless I come up with, miraculous information in the future, but that's as far as I can go with the information that's available. So Occult Ether Physics is available. You can get it in digital copy or hard copy. Then you can get it in Europe, and you can get it in Germany, France, England, Italy, Spain. I don't know which other countries. I don't remember right at this moment. And same way with Pentagon Aliens. And I don't think Pentagon Aliens is available as a digital copy. It's only a hard copy. And then you have Occult Science Dictatorship. And so there are 3 books, actually 4 if you can count the third edition, not the fourth edition, which I probably should just withdraw and make people buy the fourth edition. But anyway, so those 3 books are available at Amazon.
All right, very good. We're going to have some links up there, and then there is another website. It has a couple of years on it right now, but it's there for people who want to check it out. It's lyne.tripod.com, and it's the number 4 in the center of that. So LYNE4LYNE.tripod.com. We're going to have the link up, so check that out. But yeah, we'll take a short break here then, William. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more and pick this up after the break. Welcome back, everybody. We are talking with William Lyne about occult ether physics, Tesla, man-made UFO technology, and all the related topics that ties into this. And I wanted to get more into the role, I guess, of the government in the last couple of, last few decades then, really, if not even longer, half a century maybe at this point, of what they've been doing and how they've built up things. I mean, again, you have a pretty unique view on the whole UFO field, of the whole alien question and all that stuff. And just I wanted to kind of ask you a little bit more about that, so you can, present those ideas to our audience here a little bit. What's your general view of the UFO field? How this, I guess, from your point of view, how you've seen the mythologization of the alien and the idea of, us believing in that, and tell us more about that.
Well, the whole field was actually created by the government as a counterintelligence field, distribute misinformation. It had 2 purposes, and it was partly based on the same thing that was done to Nazi Germany. They emphasized the paranormal. The father of paranormal psychology was Hans Harbinger, who was Hitler's guru in Germany. And they basically used the paranormal stuff to stretch the credulity of the German public so they would accept the big lies. And it's being used here the same way, because the same people basically instigated it in this country after the war. And so they basically created the whole UFO field as to number 1, to cover up the UFO secrets. Number 2, to stretch the credulity by talking about aliens. Basically what this does is this wallows a big hole in the credulity of the average person so that they will believe anything the government tells them. And this has been the whole idea. And I'm a little encouraged by the fact that people are starting to question the government more and more every day, and I think it's about time. But it goes much further beyond what people suspect.
Right.
They don't realize that the science books have been distorted and so forth. So they're actually teaching kids scientific garbage, in many respects. But
yeah, I don't doubt that at all. It's if we look at the whole field of education overall, it's it's going down the tubes. But has there been kind of, as you see it, then a battle of different directions that the scientific field could have taken, but again they've avoided it? I mean, again, there seems to be a split really in the early 1900s.
Yeah, the dissenters have basically been overpowered, of course, by the unlimited money and propaganda of the government, because people like J.P. Morgan, he took over. He had a monopoly of communications. He owned not only the telephone, distribution and power distribution, but he also owned all the radio stations and banks and so forth. So they basically, what I call physics is popular physics is basically stuff that real physicists don't really pay any attention to that stuff. They don't use relativism in their scientific processes. It's basically just there to brainwash the public. They read the magazines, that this stuff is in, and so you got all these metaphysical stuff, string theory, and so forth and so on, that lead nowhere and don't really tell you anything. And they're trying to they want to have it both ways. They're now trying to figure out, well, what is this dark energy? And they're saying, well, it might be. They don't want to call it the ether, but they have different. There have been some situations which have arisen, which becomes very obvious that there's energy in space, and so they're trying to figure out something to call it other than the ether, because they don't want to make Tesla look like he was right.
But you're saying it's the same thing that's been identified.
To some degree, but they're not going to use it in any practical way. As I say, the energy companies control the government. I mean, the energy and other cartels, they control the government, so the government's not going to step out of line and really give us anything. We have to get it ourselves if we're going to have it, because the government's not going to let us have it.
Right.
So we're in a situation where the government has acquired all this technology, as I say, stealing and concealing for a long time, and basically, whereas originally it was an inventor's property, absolute property, they just grab it and force the inventor to accept a payment for it and then sign a non-disclosure agreement, so they'll go to jail if they say anything about it.
Yeah.
And so basically, we're in a situation where we have a government that possesses all this advanced technology, and we can't have it. So we're struggling along, indebted to the power company and who knows what else, and we pay through the nose for energy, and meanwhile let's say at 1900, people's energy bill was pretty low compared to today, and I doubt very seriously if it occupied as much of the a higher percentage of the income of that person,
right,
as it does today. But now it's occupying a pretty strong, percentage is being spent on, running the car, heating the house, cooling the house, or whatever,
right,
getting pretty ridiculous. But it's we basically, what they've done is they've got teams and teams of physicists and scientists, with high credentials, what I call, let's see, what I call it, I can't remember my term for credulity. It sounded like heightened credulity, because they've got credentials,
right?
And they basically are out there to ridicule anyone who comes up with a theory of anything or even a free energy process. And so these things appear and then they disappear. There's a window of about 2 weeks after these things become known before they disappear. And let's say some guy in India figured out a way to turn water into gasoline with a plant. And lo and behold, after being reviewed by the Scientific Society in India, they suddenly announced that, oh, no, it didn't work. That sort of thing. Where there's an announcement or a revelation makes it out, and then it disappears. Now, in 2001, right before 9/11, in July, the Russian Academy of Sciences made an announcement of a free energy discovery. It involved a kind of a block of silicone material, and it produced high-frequency electromagnetic waves. So you could put an inductor around it and capture that energy. You had unlimited free energy from that device. And it was produced by putting a silica material in a vacuum and with a magnetic field and centering it with certain dopants and so forth. And that's how they produced it. And I believe it was produced in response to a recommendation that I had in Pentagon Aliens, because I sent a copy of that book to Volgograd, to an aeronautical student there, and whose mother bought the book, and I sent it to him. And the experiments mentioned in the book, so I think they just carried it out, and then it disappeared. You heard nothing about it after the announcement of the Russian Academy of Sciences, and these are all top-notch scientists. You know, they're all peer-reviewed. You know, well-known internationally. That made this announcement. So, you know, they didn't do this in, you know, it wasn't just a negligent, you know, accidental, you know, occurrence. It actually occurred. So that just disappeared. Well, I wondered if those are the same scientists that were killed in 9/11 who were visiting the Pentagon, the same Russian scientists. And I don't have any verification on it, but I got a suspicion that those guys were scheduled for, you know, getting knocked off, you know,
right?
And because they'd already made this announcement, they had this information. But these kind of things. Go ahead.
Yeah, so they're doing active, not only, you know, ridicule on that level, but actually real removing some of these people that are in this position. I mean, if people are thinking back to something like the, you know, cold fusion experiments of Fleischmann and Pons, we saw what happened there. It seems like this is the standard procedure. I mean, we've seen some differences perhaps with the ECAT stuff that's been going on lately, but nonetheless, it's still very much a poo-pooed science, right? And it's not really
ECAT came from me. It's basically my atomic hydrogen furnace that Rossi had gone out of his way to conceal as the real source of it. And however, it's defective the way he did it, but he got paid off. He's out of the project now. He has nothing to do with it other than he's being called the chief scientist. But other than that, he lives in a retirement condo in West Palm Beach, Florida. And so some corporation, which I think was the U.S. Navy, paid him $200 million and took the project. And we'll hear nothing about it from now on. We won't hear about it going on the market or anybody having it and so forth.
So are you saying that it's been taken and then kind of slightly misrepresented so that it's going to give the appearance that it didn't really work as we thought? So, you know, good try, but
yeah, they've already downgraded it by a new test. It only produced 5 times as much energy.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And then that's the last that I've heard about it, and probably the last I will hear about it. And then there's the Pons and Fleischmann thing in Utah was also started with me. I had a process that I had a solar voltaic invention stolen from me. I had the documents that I was preparing for a patent application, and those documents, along with some precious metal that I had that I'd purified and extracted from ores, stolen from me, and they got the documents and they patented it. In about 10 days later, they filed a patent application on this solar voltaic invention. But when that happened, then I was suspicious of anybody that came around. And this guy had moved into my apartment, and he it turns out he was not a spy, but I thought he was at first, because so I gave him some misinformation about this process that I discovered, where I was trying to dissolve this anode of was basically a lead-based anode that I'd dissolved precious metals or other. I had no idea exactly what I had in that anode. I still have some of these ingots, and I was trying to dissolve it. Process you can dissolve it in an acid or other electrolyte, and electroplate one metal out at a time on a cathode. And so what you do is you get the scum that falls to the bottom, and you melt that back up to another ingot, and you do the next metal in the series. So I was trying to do that, but the ingot would not dissolve, and I went through this for weeks in this unrented apartment house. It's actually part of my house. It was in the winter, so it was about 40 degrees in there, and this thing wouldn't dissolve, but it started heating up the solution and boiling it even. And I was only using 3 watts of current, 6 volts at one half of an amp. So that's 3 watts current were boiling a 5-liter container of electrolyte, and I couldn't pick that beaker up without insulated gloves. It was so hot, and I was only 3 watts of current. Well, I had no idea what was in the anode. I still don't know. I know that it's got lead in it. It's got a few other metals in it, apparently. And probably has antimony, probably has some tin in it. I don't know. It's just, it's unknown. I dissolved some of these metal concentrates, and I was trying to purify them.
Right.
So this new guy came in. He wanted to rent an apartment, and he was curious about these energy processes, and I thought he was a spy, so I gave this information to him. But I told him that the anode was actually palladium. And this man was an American Indian whose mother was a Pima, and she was a Mormon who lived in Salt Lake City. So he went up there to visit her, and he gave the information to these guys at Brigham Young University, and that's how the information got to Pons and Fleischmann, and then they began to develop the process and what we call cold fusion. And actually, the reason I said palladium is I knew palladium would have some interesting reactions that would drive. I wanted to drive them crazy. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to drive the thieves crazy by giving them misinformation. So I came up with the idea of telling them that it was palladium, and consequently, a lot of people have probably gone crazy over that project. But it actually produced some useful energy, apparently. But I believe it's just atomic hydrogen process. I don't believe it's cold fusion. And just like Rossi tried to say that this process that's based on mine was cold fusion, it's basically atomic hydrogen process. And he uses heated electrical wires, resistant wires, to dissociate hydrogen, and then he pumps that into some nickel powder. And then the reaction is there. It cuts down on the temperature so that it doesn't melt his apparatus. And then he produces some energy, but he doesn't get the kind of results that are obtainable if it's done properly. And but he had to do something to make it look different and try to describe it differently, in order to show that he wasn't, to try to make it appear that he wasn't just stealing this idea from me, because my book was, or part of my book was published in Italy by a group of experimenters there. I gave him permission to do it, and that's how he got his hands on the material, and then he experimented with it and came up with a false, description and so forth. And
all right.
I'll hand him, there's some uniqueness to it, I believe, because of the way it was designed. But what do you expect? The guy was trained as a relativist, just like the rest of them. So he couldn't possibly come up with the real thing, you know.
Tell us more about the conspiracy of relativism and what you see happen there with, Einstein and Boscovich, and then, Tesla's kind of other type of science on top of that, which was neglected pretty much.
Well, Boscovich was a Croatian Jesuit priest. And so consequently, because Tesla was from that part of the world, he'd heard about Boscovich, who was known more for his books, his prose. He wrote quite a few books that were popular, you know. But he was actually the discoverer of what we call the relativist theory, and which was based on a religious concept, the immateriality of the soul. And but it has all the features of relativism in it, you know. Instead of quanta, as they describe points of light. So basically, Boscovich was already kind of reviewed and rejected by Tesla, you know, already. So when somebody comes up with Einstein, he says, "Oh, well, don't tell me about this. I've already heard about it from Boscovich," you know.
Right.
And so, you know, because Einstein's wife was actually a Serbian scientist, a physicist. So that's probably where Einstein got the information. But however, you know, there were some alterations and so forth. But it's still basically a religion. That's the reason I call it the occult science dictatorship, because it's basically a religion.
Right, right.
And these people don't want to give it up after they've studied for years and years to learn all that math and so forth that goes with it, which is basically, you know, it's like, you know, proceeding logically from an illogical concept, you know. You know, they don't want to give that up. They've spent so many years learning it now to find that it's all false. They don't like that. You know, even Einstein said, "Have we built a house of cards?" You know, and he started entertaining an ether theory again toward the end of his life. And his friend Paul Dirac, to Einstein's satisfaction, proved the existence of an ether with mathematical formulas and so forth. However, it's not a mathematical formula. You know, just basically the ether has to exist when you look at all of the things around it.
Tell us more about that, of the makeup or the proof for its existence.
Well, for example, Tesla's idea of environmental energy, you know, my atomic hydrogen process has already proven that there's energy in the environment. There's no other explanation for where the energy is coming from. You use the hydrogen just as a medium to get this reaction, but it doesn't use the hydrogen up. It doesn't disappear. So you're still getting this energy. As you circulate it in the process, you dissociate it, put it back together, and it produces radiation, which produces heat, and then you use it again. You dissociate it again, and you do this over and over ad infinitum. And so, you know, basically, you have to have something in space. You can't transmit, for example. They call the ether the luminiferous ether, because it carried the ether carried light. So you can't transmit light as a wave through anything but a solid, but you can carry it as a I'm seeing what I think might be a UFO right now.
Oh, really? Tell us what you see.
Yeah, but it's moving behind some trees now through a window. It's moving too slow to be an airplane, and it's not a helicopter. So it just happened to, the sun just happened to glint on it, and there it was. But anyway, get back to this. I see them quite often sometimes if you keep your eyes on the sky.
Right.
But anyway, this idea you see between it's all between the solid ether and the gaseous ether. The solid ether was necessary in order to prove Maxwell's equations. Maxwell was basically a relativist. He believed in a solid ether, and he believed that electromagnetic waves could be transmitted through free space. And Tesla said, no, what you're seeing is what radio waves are, is sound waves in the ether, and light is sound waves in the ether. So light is being the energy of light is being carried by the ether. Light itself isn't traveling anywhere. There's no particles moving through space. What you have is a waveform that more or less is a standing waveform in the ether that's carrying this energy through space, and where it collides with solid bodies, to produce reactions such as heat and reflection of other wavelengths. And so, you can explain the whole thing with this sound waves in the ether theory. And so all of these guys, all these guys on the other side of the fence that believed in Hertz waves were wrong, because they believed that these were transverse waves and going through space. And that's what we call radio science is all based on a fallacy. And Tesla's radio equipment seemed to work better than anything anybody else did. He designed a number of radios in the 20s and 30s that produced beautiful sound. The early car radios, some of them just really hummed. I had an old Ford that had one of those things in it, and it just produced a hum that you don't get from radios today. And
so it was picking up on that, or
yeah, it was based on Tesla's theories of the ether, and so it had a more pure, production of sound and so forth, and radio waves. Whereas if you use the other theory, you get defects, but you're still producing sound waves in the ether.
Right.
The radio transmitters that are built incorrectly still will produce the sound waves in the ether. They're just not as pure as Tesla's sound waves in the ether. And if you use Tesla's method instead, you'll come up with a better result. And I think that there are breakthroughs being made in electronics today based on Tesla theory, which some of these people are actually using, and they're not telling anybody about it because they appear to be using Tesla technology.
So if we could, let me ask you this, if we could tap into the ether then, and you say, some people have done that already successfully, but is it a matter of, extracting the energy from that, or is it a non-depletable source if we manage to successfully? Yeah, go ahead.
The ether is just a carrier. It's not a producer.
Right.
Basically, you have to get energy that's been put into it, out of it, and you can get this from like sunlight, which is like sound waves in the ether. You can convert that into electrical current. And if we really exploit this concept of the ether, there's no telling what other discoveries we'll come up with. And what we're basically doing is rediscovering what Tesla already discovered, because the government's hiding this stuff. So what we're trying to do is just reconstruct what Tesla already discovered. And, the whole potential is a whole, it just opens up a whole new field, when you start thinking about this in a different way. And you realize this energy's there, and there's energy being produced. What Tesla called primary solar rays were very powerful particles that were projected into space from bodies like the sun and other stars. And then these collide with bodies in space and create secondary radiations and sound waves in the ether. So there are all these sound waves in the ether traveling right through us and all around us that we can, if we use the right technology, we can extract that energy. And that's what I believe the atomic hydrogen furnace is doing, is it's extracting some of this environmental energy in sound waves in the ether that ultimately comes from stars. Now, I have identified something that I think is interesting, that if you take a weaker force and you convert it to a stronger force, you can do more work in the same period of time. And, of course, gravity is a weak force. An electromagnetic force is much stronger. If you convert gravity into electromagnetic force, you can do more work in the same period of time, and the energy is just what you had with the original gravity. So this is something I think that takes place in nature, so that the weaker forces are converted naturally converted into stronger forces, and that makes up for all the energy that's depleted by friction and other, extraneous drainages on this energy that's available to us.
Hmm.
So we can never run out of it, and we don't need a Big Bang to explain this energy. It's ridiculous. I mean, the Big Bang is silly. It's like something some little kid dreamed up,
How do you explain origins?
I don't think there was an origin.
Right.
I think it's hard for people to get their minds around this idea that there never was an origin. The existence has always existed.
Right.
You couldn't have a point where it didn't exist. It couldn't come into existence out of nothing, because there's your basic theory, there.
Sure. Yeah.
Is that, you have to have something to begin with. So it never originated. It'll never end. And what we see maybe as a shift in the red spectrum as some sort of proof of a Big Bang is actually maybe a shift in the red spectrum in our spot in the universe. We couldn't really say what exists beyond a certain point, because millions of years have passed since that event took place. And so we don't really, to say that the universe is expanding, well, that's kind of like there are expansions and contractions taking place in the universe, I'm sure, all over the place. But for every expansion, there has to be a contraction somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. That the universe is kind of winding down, right? That was one of the ideas.
Well, that was their idea, and that I don't believe that's true. I think that's ridiculous.
Right. Yeah.
And I also think the Earth's a lot older than they say it is, because of what I explain in my book about the process of how the Earth's mass was accumulated in the first place, very slowly. And I don't believe that the center of the Earth is a ball of iron, molten iron. That's another silly idea, I think. And I don't think that, because you can't produce something from nothing, you couldn't produce heat just by the fact that things weigh something. The Earth maybe weighs a lot, and as it accumulates more and more mass, it can't just continue to produce heat just because it weighs more. Somewhere along the line, you have to have a compression and a decompression of that mass in order to produce heat. It couldn't just continue to produce this heat and have a molten ball of iron in the middle, without boiling on the surface. If you had, it's just a matter of thermodynamics. If you had a ball of molten iron in the center of the Earth, that would radiate up toward, through the mass above it, all the way to the surface, and we would have the Earth would be melted on its surface. And it's just ridiculous ideas like that. Plus, you would have no magnetism in the molten iron.
Right.
So the Curie point, you have to worry about that.
Now, let me ask you, let's go back a little bit more here. I wanted to ask you more about the concept of that the sightings we see are not aliens. I think even you stated somewhere that, okay, it's, in regards to alien, you're not saying that it's, impossible for them to exist or intelligent life to exist elsewhere in the universe. It's just you're questioning the basic idea if they've, been here and all that. And I guess you come to that conclusion because of what you speculate when it comes to, abductions, what we've learned through, hypnosis, what people are saying about hybrids, mutilations. There's a number of these factors, right? And so how has this field been created as you see it? And what is the involvement from the, CIA and the government, and how are they using it?
Well, one experimenter at Harvard, for instance, who was an understudy of the guy who worked for the CIA, he hypnotized students who were known to have sleep disorders, and he exploited these sleep disorders to make them have hypnagogic hallucinations that they were seeing aliens. And all the people describe being paralyzed when they're seeing these aliens. Well, that's called sleep paralysis, and it's part of narcolepsy. It's one of the symptoms of narcolepsy. is sleep paralysis. We're paralyzed anytime we have REM sleep, which is anytime we're dreaming, basically. So they're basically exploiting these people with sleep disorders, and they advertise for them in the paper, bring them in, pick out the ones that are gullible, and use them for a project to prove that people are being abducted. But they all see the image of an alien as it's been shown to them. Somehow it's been suggested what this alien is supposed to look like. And so it's just using trick, hypnotherapy or whatever, to create this effect, just to create, it's all CIA propaganda. The original guy who taught this professor was Martin Orme, who went to University of Pittsburgh after he left Harvard. And the professor was John Mack, and he almost lost his PhD because of this project. Because look at what he's doing. He's abusing these patients, and just to create propaganda for the CIA's misinformation network. And this type of stuff. This is, I show some of this stuff. How it works in Occult Science Dictatorship. I go back to one of the old projects, which was admittedly a government project, and Project Blue Book was a CIA project, for example.
Right. Yeah.
And then there was a Project Lure, which is a CIA project, and this was to make people think they're going to lure aliens down by putting a bunch of weird symbols on the ground or something, And so here you have, all these people have credentials, to impress the public, PhDs, high military rank, so forth and so on. This is supposed to impress people and make them believe it. And but it's just a trick. People have to understand that the aliens. If they're, let's say an alien was on a habitable planet, well, that would be, a couple of million light years away. So what do? They invent something called a wormhole to try to, explain how they could get here, in time to still be alive, and so forth. So, they come up with all these crazy theories of physics, which are designed to enhance these false, this misinformation network, basically.
So if we look at it from the other point of view, even with the ether technology and the current development of the UFO, man-made UFO, is any of that type of traveling from, the vast distances in a short amount of time possible?
Not really. You can only go from A to B in so short a time. You can go, I don't know, like I say, I witnessed one going, 36,000 miles per hour. But that's nothing, compared to the speed of light. And if you went at the quarter of the speed of light, a particle the size of a grain of sand would totally destroy a ship. It's just a matter of, that's physics for you.
And there's no protection or anything that's built up because of the energy or,
Well, there might
shields.
be some way that they could make a little particle like that get out of the way, but you couldn't get an asteroid to move out of the way,
Right, yeah.
You can only take that so far. You could, like they make the air and the atmosphere move out of the way so that the UFO doesn't burn up. At 36,000 miles per hour, that UFO that I saw would have been burned to a crisp by the oxygen. And so they had to move it out of the way for that ship to fly through there. And that was in 1953. And my mother witnessed a bunch of them in 1950. Hovering over our town, and they were there for 45 minutes over 2 days. There was 15 minutes one day, 30 minutes the next day, two of them one day, one of them the other day. And so there was 45 minutes of viewing time of these UFOs, and I was in Davis Mountains 120 miles away, so I didn't see them. But my mother described the ships she saw as looking like the bobbin on her sewing machine, if you know what one of those looks like from those old
actually,
sewing machines.
I don't, but
like a little bright metal, like a spool, but it's curved a certain way, and it's bright metal, and has a slot around it,
All right. Yeah.
So that's the way she said they looked. And so, that was a certain type of German UFO has been described as looking like that. So that was consistent with the descriptions of some German UFOs. 1950, that's only 5 years after World War II, so these things evolved,
Yeah, where are they
from that.
today, do you think, in terms of, I mean, do they have a whole arsenal of these things? They're building up more and more all the time and advancing the technology?
They have new ones that they're building, and they have old ones from World War II. They have some of the old ones still around. They don't wear out. They can keep these things in hangars, but they apparently are hiding them underground. And they have mountains, for example, that can open up. They hire artists to put camouflage over it that looks just like the mountain. And then there's these huge doors that can open up and let these things come out and go back in. And so they also can hide them under a lake, but they're not actually in the water. They go into the water, but then they're pulled up above the water line by some sort of mechanical gadgets to put them in a hangar underground. So they hangar these things underground, or, I believe they've got them in a hangar on a ranch near me, in huge barns that are designed to look like barns for cattle ranch, but the barns are way too big for any kind of cattle ranch barns. So that's a dead giveaway. Plus, I've seen the ships going to and from that ranch. And
what are they? Why are they flying around with them? If is
they're
it
just
testing,
what
or
they
is it?
do is they just come up with incessant new projects to test on them. Incessant new uses. Let's say surveillance in Iraq. They might use them for that. And they can hangar them here and fly to Iraq every day to do their work, because the speed is so fast, it doesn't take them very long to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't take much energy. The UFO is basically a free energy invention, and it uses this.
And they're using it for these kind of mundane tasks, if you will.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah, they're using them for surveillance and other experiments like cattle mutilations, which is really cattle dissections. What they're really doing is they're using a particle beam weapons on the UFOs, which is one of the few weapons they're able to use on them. So they can use particle beam weapons, test them on cattle, which are similar to humans, to figure out how to kill people without leaving any evidence that the person's been murdered. So basically they can kill anybody, and you can't prove they were murdered, because there's no evidence. They die of pneumonia because their immune system's been wiped out by ultraviolet light. So they can use ultraviolet lasers. They can use, and they tune these things so that there's no evidence left. That's what the experiments are all about. They basically have airborne labs in these things where they have taken cattle, for instance, that have been checked by a veterinarian and been given a bill of health that shows that they have absolutely no pneumonia in their systems. 2 days later, they're found dead with dying of pneumonia, terminal pneumonia. So basically all their blood is gone, and certain parts are removed to check for ionization. So what they're doing is they're developing a method for murder, call it stealth murder, and where there's no evidence that anybody's been murdered. That person just died of pneumonia. Of course, you wipe out ultraviolet light will wipe out all of your immune cells and your oncogenes, and you will die of MAI, Microbacterium aerium intercellulare, which are soil bacteria. We carry these things in our system, but if our immune systems wipe out, they take over and we die of pneumonia, terminal pneumonia. This, of course, is what a lot of the AIDS patients die of when their immune system's been severely compromised. And ultraviolet light will do that, and will give you cancer. And So, that's a nice weapon that the government's using on UFOs. And you have no protection from it, basically.
No.
Except,
no, finish that point. Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, the only protection you have is maybe thick walls or whatever, metallic surfaces and so forth.
Right.
It could stop ultraviolet. And they were testing one of these things on me, and I think maybe trying to kill me with it. That's what I was interviewed about by the Jesse Ventura group. But they didn't get my true story in the thing that was aired. They missed it. This thing was only about 100 yards away. It was only about 300 feet, and it was flashing. And it took me a while to realize that it was actually shooting a beam at me, ultraviolet, because I was getting headaches, and the headaches are a result of seeing ultraviolet light. That'll give you a headache. So I would get these sicknesses that would last for about 4 months, and I realized they were irradiating me, so I moved to a different part of my house to get away from them. This was going on a regular basis when I was writing these books. When I was writing the second edition of Space Aliens from the Pentagon, I was being irradiated, and I was really sick for 4 months after that. And that's when I moved to a different part of my house, when I realized that they were actually shooting this beam at me. And then I found out in 2009 that these ships were actually coming from that ranch over there, which is only about 9 miles away. So, I saw the ships going to the ranch and coming in and going out and so forth. And then I realized, well, there's something to these stories. There are these people that lived over in the community of Galisteo who were trying to find the Palladian alien UFO base over there, and they wanted to know if I could get them in that ranch. And then I thought, well, these people are just nutcakes. But actually, they were seeing these ships. That's what they were seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, subject to all that propaganda. They were believing all this propaganda the government's putting about aliens.
So is your conclusion then that when we see, for example, sightings over, nuclear weapons sites and facilities, then the consequent shutdown of those, that there have been the same kind of sightings and consequent shutdowns on airports in China, Japan? I think now most recently we had one in Bremen in Germany. Is that for display then? Public display? Okay, what's the reason for that?
Well, they all get together. They want to hide the technology. You figure the Chinese Communist state, they wouldn't want the Chinese citizens to have a UFO. Just like North Korea wouldn't want them to have it, because then people could fly out anytime they wanted to. People could travel anywhere in the world they want to travel. Imagine what problems they'd have with customs officials, with people flying everywhere in UFOs. So all of these things are a nightmare for the statists in the world, the people that want to control everybody, whether they're communists or fascists. They all want to control people, and they don't want something in the hands of the public that would allow people that much freedom.
Oh, certainly. No, I understand that. I guess what I was getting at that is that what we're seeing, what we're witnessing is almost the display of the technology in certain sites. It's like, here we are kind of thing, right? So how does that...
It's kind of funny when the government denies their existence, when so many people are citing them,
Well, exactly. And so is that the building up of the mythology again, do you think? So that they're trying to urge on like this idea that, these are aliens, it's not our ships. Is that the main motive?
It's totally insane. Aliens come here because they don't want us using nuclear energy. It's a dope. It's a stupid,
or
scenario.
Nuclear weapons, I guess it was. But
nuclear weapons,
Mm-hmm.
And so they're coming over here and shutting down our nuclear weapons production. That doesn't happen, unless the government wants it to happen. It's something the government would do. They'll go to any lengths and spend any amount of money to conceal this technology. There's no limit. They've got all our tax money to do anything they want to with. And if they don't have enough money, they can run the printing presses, and they got more. So, there's no, since all of their corporate interests are tied up in the archaic technology, any money they can spend is well spent if they can cover up this technology with any kind of ridiculous scenarios, And, we hear, well, they shut down a nuclear plant. Well, where did you hear that information? You have to question the source of the information. If they could do all that, why would they allow something like the explosion at Fukushima, and allow all this nuclear stuff to leak out and poison everybody? That doesn't make a lot of sense. That's not cost effective for propaganda. So, there are many pitfalls to their method, and in the end, they will fail. As the Scottish poet Robert Burns said, "The best laid plans of mice and men will go astray."
Right.
And
do you think that we're seeing a build-up or a construction of a new religion around this, to a certain extent?
Well, there are some people that theorize that this is a new religion, and then there are some people that think, well, they're going to have a fake alien invasion and have a fascist world state.
Sure.
I think they already have it. I think we already have a fascist world state.
I wouldn't argue with that point.
And I believe we've had it for many years. I mean, my experiences show that we have a fascist world state, and we've had it for many years. And why would they want to rock the boat when they have everything the way they want it?
Sure.
They've got it. They got the world by the cojones, and they're not going to turn loose, by having something that's going to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. The goose that laid the golden egg is all the wonderful methods they've set up to control all the money and everybody in it and everybody in society. And a fascist world state would stop that. So you wouldn't have all that money. You wouldn't have all that production. If people were locked down, you wouldn't have all the money. You wouldn't have all the things to, all the productivity of all the people. They're being enslaved by this.
I guess one of the points that's been argued on top of that as well is just what you said before, but they have all the money at their disposal. So at this point, it's not even about the money anymore. It's about the control of the people within that system. And they, as you said, they could still turn on the printing presses when they want, or devise something which basically enables them to live outside of the realm of the monetary finances as we are tied to it by. So it's all very, in that regard, relative in terms of where you're at in the hierarchy. But what do you see then is the ultimate kind of purpose, I guess, of this and where that is going? You mentioned, for example, that there's been less sightings recently. What's the reason for this, and how will this develop, do you think, in the future?
I think they're basically trying to go back to the old idea that, it's all a fantasy, they don't exist, and if a person hasn't seen one, pretty soon all the people that have seen them will be dead, and there'll be nobody left around that's actually seen one, or they'll be ridiculed for even saying it. Most people don't even want to say they've seen one when they've seen one because they're afraid of being ridiculed. My own father was held for about a half an hour by one of these ships over his car in Level End, Texas, 1957, and he didn't talk about it when he came home. He went to the Ford house to have his lights fixed, and so I turned on the morning news, and I heard about the sightings in Level End, people being held hostage in their cars by these things hovering over the cars. So I went down to the Ford house, and I confronted my father. I said, "Why didn't you tell me about the UFO?" And he said, "Well, I didn't want to be called crazy." This thing hovered over his car, killed his engine, burned out all of his headlights and taillights, but not a fuse was blown in the car. So he had to drive back to Level End, spend the night in a motel, and then get up at the first early light and drive back down to Odessa, Texas, because he was on a sales trip. And so, here he'd been helped by this thing hovering right over his car, just a few feet above it. Big egg-shaped chinga, and apparently there were a number of other people that had the same experiences or similar experiences that same night. And so I think, well, this is a staged sighting. The government sends these things out to freak people out, and just to create a lot of controversy, and people will argue about aliens, talk about aliens and so forth. Just basically to cover up the technology and to stretch the credulity. Condition people to accept the big lies. That's half of the thing right there.
Right, yeah. And you said in your book as well that they have made extensive studies on human psychology, religion, mysticism, mythology, folk tales, and all that stuff connected. And you see that ties into it, right?
It's what went into the creation of the Third Reich. That was all done through the Tavistock Institute of Britain, financed by the Rockefellers. So the Rockefellers designed the Third Reich and the mass psychology technology, and they trained, the SS in this technology, and they used it on the Germans just to see if it would work. I think Nazi Germany was a big experiment, and the work product of all those experiments became the possession of the United States and England after the war. So it was just a big project, to see how far they could control the world, and so basically what they did was they created the United Nations after that, and then let's just spread this whole process to the world and make everybody think it's a wonderful thing for mankind. And but I don't see the UN doing anything to stop mass murders in Africa. I thought that's a little conspicuous.
They're shipping in their food, bags of rice.
Yeah,
that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, it's a tremendous mess in the world. I don't think anyone can really argue with that, and there's a lot of components to why we are in the mess we're in, and it has to do with everything from conspiracy to personal responsibility. That's definitely for sure. But before we begin to wrap things up for this time, William, I have a couple of more questions for you. Where do you think we will be with the free energy device question, the development of anything that could liberate that technology for us? I mean, people have speculated if people get on top of it, they begin to develop it on an open source basis, or the more and more people make it in their homes and start using it and teaching others how to do it, that would be one of the ways it could be prevented from being stopped from a central point of view with patents and everything else. What do you make of that?
It all comes down to this. If enough people do it at the same time, they won't be able to stop it. If enough people get enough information, valid information, not some cockamamie stuff that doesn't work, but if enough people get enough information and do it, and everybody does it all over the place, the government won't be able to, they won't be able to stop it without being obvious about it, And just a matter of time before somebody develops something that's practical, that people, it's all going to come down to creativity. And, these ideas are going to have to find their way to the public one way or the other. And if we get somebody like Edward Snowden, he was like a hero. If we get somebody in the energy field who knows some of the stuff that Snowden has may relate to this. And that may be really why they're out to get him like they are, is because he's got stuff that they really don't want us to know about. And you figure you have to ask what is so important about what the man has. There's no telling. It really makes you wonder. And, if the public can get their hands on just, one fraction, of what the government is hiding, we can all, write our own checks, but I don't think anybody can escape from the idea that we seem to be reaching a nodal point here, that there seems to be a point where something's got to give.
Right.
And, somebody like Snowden has kind of, they want to make him, they want to crush him to make an example out of him to anybody that has the same idea. But many people believe that he should be rewarded for what he's done because of the fact that he let us know that the phone company's been bugging our phones for years.
Well, exactly. Well, it's been.
I've known about it since 1967.
Well, exactly. I was going to say that. It's certainly okay. It's great that it comes out to the masses in that regard that it did, but it's for those who've been paying attention. It's frankly nothing new. This is what NSA is for. That's what they built their multi-million-dollar data center facilities up in Utah. That's what this is.
Well, all phone calls have been recorded in the United States since 1967. The only thing that's changed is the storage capacity.
Yeah.
They used to have to cycle them off after 2 weeks. They could only hold a phone conversation for 2 weeks. Now they can hold them indefinitely because they've got enough storage capacity.
Yeah.
So they can go back 10 years ago and get your phone conversations.
And they can search, I think, pretty easy for the data as well, finding the keywords and stuff like that. So
yeah, they can find information, and that's how suddenly you can't figure out somebody. How does the government know what you're thinking? Because they're bugging your phone and somebody's reading it. So
and it's more than that in these days. They're getting it's intrusion into the devices, into your home, the computer, the dishwasher, the fridge, depending on if it's so-called smart devices, the TV, and everything else.
The phones could be bug your whole house. While they're on the hook.
Yeah.
They could tune it to different parts of your house to get more information. And so they can drive by in a car and bug your house with your telephone.
So what do you think is the measure against this, and will the system that's been built up, will it crumble under its own weight, collapse if people speak up against it? How will it be cracked, do you think?
Well, I believe the only way we can get things back to normal is take the money away from the powers that be. As long as they've got unlimited money, they're going to do everything they can to take more and more of our freedom. Because that's the nature of the beast. They always want to impress somebody, their bosses or whoever, with all the new breakthroughs and so forth. And the corporations want to sell more of this technology to the corporations, to the public sector, to the government. They want to sell this stuff and they want to make money, and so they devise more and more ways to spy on people, and it just keeps invading more and more of our freedom. And then the next step is a police state, which inadvertently comes about as a matter of natural process because of all the stuff that they have, and so if we take the money away from them, the corporations will lose power. That's where the big problem is. The corporations have too much money, and individuals and people, ordinary people in society, are getting poorer and poorer. So something has to change this equation. It can't go on like this forever, because sooner or later, as I say, I'm going to kill the goose that laid the golden egg.
Right.
And the way they look at it, we don't need any more creativity. We don't need any more inventions. We got enough inventions stored up in our vaults to last us for the next 1,000 years.
Right. Yeah.
And so we can now just enslave the human race. We don't have to use them to think anymore. We don't want anybody to think. We can create a whole race of humans that don't even know how to think.
Well, and unfortunately, it seems to be heading in that direction.
Yeah, and we can all just go do some rote job, be slaves.
Yeah, I think there will be a organic, natural rebellion, if we can call it that, against this type of activity, and more people will, choose a different route, walk away from the media, from the propaganda, from the scientific dictatorship, and all that stuff. And I still feel, I feel positive about it. I hope it's going to turn.
Well, I think Monsanto was deeply seated all over the world, and people don't realize that they buy up energy secrets. And I know a person who sells energy secrets to them. He acquires them, goes around and gets these secrets and then sells them to Monsanto. And they pay a lot of money for him to come and demonstrate one of these things. And if it works, they pay him a lot of money. And if it doesn't work, they give him a chance to come back and try it again.
Right.
They pay him by the minute, a lot of money. And then they hide the technology, and that's the last you hear of it. And so it's like a black hole of ideas,
Right. Well, again, it has to be on that level where people refuse to sell it in that regard, no matter how much they're offered, or the people who are going out and hunting for it. It has to be a change in people's perception about these things, I think, mentally, for it to turn around.
Well, just think what the oil companies are willing to pay to keep that stuff quiet.
Sure.
Let's say Monsanto gets the information, then they can sell it. They can blackmail the oil companies,
Yeah.
to keep it quiet.
So, William, before we wrap things up here, tell us when's your next book out due? I heard you're working on a new one, right?
Well, I'm writing one on in 1980, I discovered that there was a ancient Minoan colony sponsored by the Egyptian pharaoh in this ranch near me. And I spent about over 30 years researching this, and the book is almost done, but I can't get the software. Like I say, the software is giving me a problem. I don't know enough about it. If I had the talents of my son and my ability of my son, I could have this book out a long time ago. But right now, I've been held up for months because of the software limitations. And I now have the software that I need to get it done if I can just figure out how to use it. So it's all comes down to that. The book's basically written, and it's got a lot of documentation. It's really going to be a mind blower for the archaeological community because, you know, this is hard facts, and it's irrefutable information that these Egyptians came here and colonized in around 1626, 27 BC, and in New Mexico.
Interesting.
And they're basically refugees from the island of Santorini, what was originally called Calista, and which you might know as Thera. When the volcano started to erupt, they had to evacuate.
Right.
Eventually, they were backed by the Egyptians and sent over here to claim the territory in the name of the Egyptian pharaoh, which they did.
Well, that sounds interesting. Maybe we can have you back here, William, at some point to talk more about that. That's a whole 2-hour show in itself right there.
I think so. When I get the book out, it'll be interesting to see what the reaction is, you know, because it's factual. You know, I deciphered a stone called the Jed Festival Stone, and I deciphered it, and it's just covered with hieroglyphics and other Egyptian writings, and also it's got three kinds of hieroglyphs, and in addition, it also has something called Tifinagh, which is obtained by the Libyans from the Norse, and also some Libyan writing on it. So it's got a lot of information, and then I found more and more and more stuff all over the place. There's a lot of Norse stuff here, for example.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of people getting into these kinds of subjects now, and they find cultural references all over the place in North America and America specifically. It's very interesting, actually. There's quite a few good people doing work on this, actually.
Yeah, it's starting to look bad for the archaeologists.
That's right. Well. All right. Well, we'll see if we can pick that up at another time then, William. But in the meantime, we say thank you for your time and for talking with us. Different perspective on these topics, something to think about. We'll have the links up on our website for the books and to your website as well. So check out redicemembers.com and redicecreations.com. But thanks for your time today, William. I appreciate it.
Well, Henrik, it's really been enjoyable, and I really liked your frame of mind and your openness, and the way you interviewed me was very nice.
Thank you.
I thank you very much.
We have some great shows coming up with Robert Felix, Sophia Smallstorm, John King, William Mullen, Kong Pop Yen, Karen Hughes, and Barbara Peterson. Thank you to all our members, and my thanks to the crew at Red Ice, as always, for their hard work. We'll be back in just a couple of days. Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care, stay cool, and we'll talk to you later.